Well, hi there. How are you?
I'm fine, and Merry Christmassy crimbly things.
Thank you.
Because it's the Mark and Carrie Christmas special.
Yeah, end of the year. I heard you had a bit of a morning.
So we had a big storm up here in the northeast. I believe it was another of these bomb cyclones where you get a ridiculous amounts of water. And we've got some big trees lying around the house. Literally lying around the house. So I spent the morning chopping bits up because being a good tight Scotsman, I dry this all out and turn it into firewood. And then I noticed there was an electrical conduit that was open.
Oh, that's so
that
sorry.
had been blown open and it had a nest in it.
Yeah.
So I had to get out a big ladder and go up and do all that. So anyway, that was the morning. So and it's freezing cold, so it wasn't ideal. But anyway, now we're here.
But you're alive. You didn't electrocute yourself. You didn't fall.
Didn't fall off the ladder. We're all
okay. Well, there's I know there's stuff to talk about, but of course, the Colorado Supreme Court saying that former President Trump will not be on the primary ballot. That should be printed, will be printed January 5th. But the contingency is if it's in the pipe somewhere with the Supreme Court, then then his name will, I believe this is accurate, will remain on the ballot printing. So this is the January 5th deadline is the number or the date that you keep hearing about. And that's because that's when Colorado would have to print their primary ballots. So it's just an interesting way to kick an election to the Supreme Court.
Do you think that if Colorado has done this, then this sort of re-energizes attempts at other states to do this? Because there have been prior attempts and they failed, right?
Yeah, no, there's still, Michigan has one, I think Minnesota. So there are other cases waiting in the wings. It just seems so dangerous to bring in the judicial branch to make this sort of decision and to not, it just plays into so many of the talking points, right? The deep state has decided all of this. Like the people don't get to decide. You can hear all the...
Right, you can, but at the same time, it's like, if you're an insurrectionist, right? That's something for the judicial branch to decide.
Yeah. So
if they decide you're an insurrectionist, then the 14th Amendment applies, and therefore you don't get to do it. It seems relatively straightforward. So forget the deep state. Isn't that what states are meant to do?
Well, I think, yes, that's true. But what is the truth? Is he an insurrectionist? Did he do anything?
Well, right, because he's never actually been tried for that.
Right. Yeah.
Now, is he going to be tried for that? Isn't that the Georgia case?
There's some, not specifically on the insurrectionist title or tag. There's January 6th stuff, but it's not that specific in relation to the 14th Amendment. So the court...
you invited a whole bunch of your friends to come to D.C. and then basically break into a public building and bring zip ties. I'm not a constitutional lawyer by any means, right? But, that insurrection might be one of the words used. How come nobody's went for that?
Because I think it's hard to prove that and to prove what role he actually had. I think the people around him, what was he doing for, I think there's the Nixon tapes, there's 80 plus minutes if you don't know what he's doing and it still hasn't been accounted for. But no one actually knows what he was doing after the January 6th commission too. So I'm not sure that anyone wants to put that particular label on him. But one thing to sort of bring this all together, the court is hearing today is whether or not he has presidential immunity and whether one of the cases can be tried, the case that's supposed to be heard in March. And the court will hear that today and presumably make a decision on that pretty fast because that does start in just a couple of months. So if the court rules in Trump's favor, it really is the president is above the law.
Right.
The Supreme Court is really having to make some real decisions here.
If they do that, the precedent going forward is really important because, Trump won't always be there. And whoever comes in at some future point, right? You're literally saying that if you get this job, you have immunity from everything.
Yeah. No,
it's not going to attract the best, is it?
The presidency is all about precedents, right? Because there isn't, just executive power shall be vested in the president of the United States. That's
doesn't
it.
say anything, right?
Right. And
fill in the blanks.
Yeah, it's all about precedents.
But then if the court starts filling in the blanks and that means you're almost like a god.
Yes.
It's not too healthy for a democracy, is it?
Right. Well, and the court it's not as clear as liberal and conservative when it comes to presidential power. Elena Kagan, a liberal justice, but has not at all clapped back at presidential power. So it'll be interesting.
Well,
how the
liberals
court
are kind of stuck on this one in the sense that liberals believe in the power of the state.
Yeah.
And the way that you get things done is not through Congress. You spend through Congress, but you do it through presidential initiatives. At least one way you do it. So you want to have a strong presidency because you believe in the power of the state. So you don't want to necessarily pull this back because if you do, that can be used against you the next time you're president and then you want to do something like, no, you said we couldn't get to do this stuff.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And that Congress has really taken a backseat and said that the president knows better than they do. I mean, and it doesn't matter who walks through the door, Hillary Clinton, fill in the blank, Democrat or Republican. It's not like they say, oh, Congress should now have all this power that I have. Yeah.
So anyway, he's probably not going to get prosecuted and none of this will matter. And then he's still ahead in all the polls and he's going to walk through all of the Republican nominations. And when he started off, remember he shocked people with his speech about Mexicans being rapists and murderers, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, this is terrible, right? Well, I don't know if you caught the one from last week, which was basically like that on steroids, essentially. Sort of like, everyone foreign, I'm going to get rid of them all, that one sort of stuff. And it's like, as a landed immigrant and citizen of the United States, should I be worried? I don't know. This seems to be much more hardcore this time. And if he's got there's no safety rails on this one, right? Yeah. When he comes in, it's a total demolition job. Yeah. I mean, I hope that the people that really want this guy to win are thinking this through. I just don't think they are.
Well, I think especially on the immigration point, it's such a losing policy issue for Democrats because there's no, how do you win the border? The Democrats haven't figured that out. And it's clearly something that his hardcore base really love. Yeah. And
it's a real it's a real issue, and it's a real issue that's only going to get worse with time, right? So, what you need to have is some kind of comprehensive immigration reform that would actually okay, you people go stand over there, you get it done in 5 years. You people unfortunately are not getting it done at all, etc. And then you know what the state of play is. But instead of which is just sort of like, we're just going to spend an enormous amount of money building a wall.
I know. Well, and in some ways, Greg Abbott and DeSantis have been, played their hand quite well by the busing of migrants to northern cities, because you hear the mayor of New York, right? We have no more money to
no
help
more
with
shelters,
housing.
all the rest of it. Right. And so long as they're coming over their border into the southern border, like Northern Democrats don't have to care.
Yep, that's exactly right.
What started off as a series of stunts, remember the plane going to Martha's Vineyard and this sort of stuff, really has just ramped up. And it's like, okay then. And you see, it's funny because this is just like what happens in the EU. Yeah. Right? So remember the migrant crisis in 2015, and there's 2 million at the border, and Germany takes 1 million, and this undermines Merkel and launches the AfD. There's still exactly the same issues, and the southern border there is essentially Greece and Italy, and to a certain extent Spain. And they're the ones where everyone arrives. Yeah. And it's meant to be a burden-sharing exercise, and there is, and it's gotten much better. But what that means is small countries like Ireland, Latvia, are taking in people, and those are becoming very visible minorities and creating a politics there of anti-immigration which never existed before. Yeah. So, this is immigration is not one of those things that liberals can wish away. It's a real set of issues.
Well, I feel like the EU actually had some real policy around it versus the US, where we just throw our hands up and, our hair's on fire every single. And it's always just a cyclical issue, too. It's not one that's like, oh, actually, this is something maybe we should talk more about all the time. Yeah.
Well, if you set it up so that you're only going to pass, 15 bills or whatever it is.
That's right.
I mean, you're not set up to legislate. You're just set up to be on Twitter and
just
scream.
To talk, yeah. I have some good news for you, though, Blyth.
What's
There's only 1,488 days until the January 2028 Iowa caucuses. So, you think you're done with the 2024 Iowa caucuses, and there's only 1,500 days until 2028 So it just,
it just keeps coming. It just keeps coming. Yeah. Let's jump back a couple of weeks. We're sitting here at Brown University, and our president wasn't hauled up in the front of Congress, but 3 others were. Yeah. What did you think of that whole thing?
It was such a political stunt by the Republicans in Congress. Elise Stefanik, who was, got a lot of airtime with her questioning, and it was just something that you couldn't, as watching it unfold, that the president couldn't not walk into that trap. Yeah. Right? It was just set up in such a way that and they're trying to do something that's much more nuanced, but the questioning didn't allow for that particular nuance to happen because it's actually a complex issue for First Amendment rights, actually pretty complex. And so I had a lot of empathy for the president just because it was such a stunt. And Elise Stefanik, who's just deplorable, just set it up and just,
you used the Hillary word. Why is she deplorable?
I mean, she was back in the day, she was fairly moderate and then just drank the Kool-Aid and went hardcore Trump mega land. And since then just says bonkers stuff.
Right. But the bonkers stuff she got attention for seemed to be a pretty non-bonkers claim, which was, is it the case that students can basically create kind of verbal violent assembly on campus and make claims which amount to the claim that you Jewish people, not only should have no land, you have no real right to exist. Should that be allowed on campus? Is that something that would concern you?
Yeah.
Now, yes, there are complex issues around free speech, but that shouldn't concern you. Yeah. Right. Basically, when you're getting to that level of actually saying that people shouldn't exist, then it's pretty clear cut that's bollocks and you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So in a sense, they were handed, they knew the pitch was coming.
Yeah.
The fact that they weren't better able to actually deal with it, that was the bit that surprised me. Those folks are briefed up the wazoo. They are media trained and they look like they got caught in the headlights.
But don't you think the fine line was free speech and you say what you like, and then there's the part that bumps up against harassment or violence, and that's what they were trying to draw the line between, and it just wasn't.
Right, but we have campus climate surveys here at Brown and everywhere else, and like 50% of people who work here think that they will say in a survey that they don't think that they can say what they actually think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the freedom of speech thing resonates. This is not just a stunt.
Yeah.
This is actually resonating deeply with many people in their working lives who feel that there's certain forms of speech that we in our elites will privilege and protect, and other forms of speech which we don't allow. The other thing that I found fascinating about this, and of course the president of University of Pennsylvania, who's now the ex-president, was the first person to suffer this, but the outside effect of donors,
huge,
absolutely huge. Now, to me, this isn't a surprise at all, because if you look at the Ivies, what have the Ivies done over the past 25 to 30 years? They've developed pretty much. Even Brown has done this now. We have a pretty large endowment. And that endowment is professionally managed.
Yep.
In the case of the really big Ivies, they're basically hedge funds that run your university for tax purposes.
Yeah.
So your big donors, who themselves are hedges, tend to think about the world this way. I'm putting $1 billion into a fund. I expect a certain level of performance. If I don't get it, I withdraw my funds. If I withdraw my funds, the fund closes.
Yeah.
So you will dance when I say dance.
Yes. Yes. And it sounded like the president Penn had been in trouble through the fall as well, but exactly for the reasons that you just said.
But, let's remember on the other side of this, the free speech absolutists that you find in the Republican Party, they're absolutely for that until it's something they don't like.
Yes.
And the minute it's something they don't like, then, this has to be closed down. And it's like, hang on, aren't you the folks that are constantly saying you shouldn't close things down?
Yes.
And again, I was super surprised that, at least in the bits that I saw or read, none of the presidents actually challenged him on this.
Yeah.
And said, come on, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
This is mansplaining 101, right? You're telling me that free speech is important. Now you're telling me I should police this free speech. Like, you can't have it both ways, lads. So we're doing a lot of American politics. Let's go somewhere else. What else is going on in the world?
Yeah. I mean, so I know this from reading the front page of the paper, so I'm going to toss this one to you, and that's the Argentinian election.
Oh, yeah.
And the far
right guy.
But has decided to dismantle the administrative state. Is that, and that's part of it?
This is, this seems to be the sort of the play now that activist conservatives have figured out. What you need to do is, if you can't get rid of individual programs, you just need to undermine the capacity of the state to administer anything. So essentially, we've got 21st century problems, and the idea is let's have a 19th century state.
Yeah.
So we'll see if this works, right? Now, the way that Milei in Argentina is doing this is, he doesn't really have a political party, but he got way more votes than anybody expected. He is the president in a presidential system. He has to work with Congress. He can't abolish the central bank, you can't really just go straight for dollarization, all the stuff that he talked about. But he does want to basically crush the administrative state, because if you do that, the ability of the Peronist state to keep paying off its constituencies collapses.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Right. Now, there's an analogy for this. There's a great paper. I don't know if it's out yet, but it's by a young woman scholar in the London School of Economics, who, forgive me, the name escapes me. But it's coming out in the APSR, American Political Science Review. And it's precisely about how we did this after Reconstruction. So Southern elites reckoned that, like, with Reconstruction and the value of their slaves and everything being taken away from them, they're going to be penniless. And of course, the way that they were going to reconstruct was to tax the South. So if you can fight individual taxes, that's time consuming. The other thing you can do is just massively underfund the state. So what they did was they gutted the administrative state. The South had a very high functioning capacitous state, if you want to put it that way. They could do a lot of stuff. And they basically just underfunded all the jobs and closed them down and consolidated whatever. And that's why the South now has a crap state, because it's by design. Right? Now, just take that forward, and this becomes the playbook for basically getting all the things that you want that you can't get through a Congress.
Oh, this is so true. I mean, back to the United States for 1 second, in that there's a case before the court about essentially like starting to dismantle the administrative state in the U.S. a little bit, at least. They heard it in the fall. So this is just so interesting in thinking about taking this and expanding it across the country.
So, and if you think about, why people would want this, because one of the arguments that the Peronists, the establishment left, if you want to put it, who've been in charge for a while, just can't get their heads around, is the fact that so many poor people voted for this guy. Because they live on the programs and on the transfers that, he is going to absolutely cut. This is going to be austerity on steroids, right? And usually these things just don't end well. So, in a sense, be careful what you wish for. But I'm not sure I buy that. I think that basically you get to a point when 40% of the population are now below the Argentine, never mind our poverty line, the Argentine poverty line. And they just look at people who are still okay. They're like, things can't get any crapper for me, but I'm going to make sure they're going to get crapper for you.
How does that fix? I mean, inflation is triple digits, right? But so how is that just a political ploy to, because it doesn't actually fix inflation?
Well, I mean, so what's the inflation problem for Argentina? I mean, part of it is just good old monetization. They basically have a lot of liabilities. They print particular bonds. They sell the bonds. There's a lot of monetary inflation, if you want to put it that way. The other one is it comes through the import channel, right? So you're not exporting enough to pay for your imports, so your current account gets out of balance. Your currency falls in value. You've got a ton of dollar-denominated debt. Your ability to pay your foreign debts gets impaired. So your ability to finance your imports gets impaired, but you have critical imports, so they cost more, so that's going to be higher prices, right? So all of that's going on. The way this is usually dealt with in Argentina is they have a big harvest. They've had a couple of crappy harvests, particularly for soy, but basically the Peronists are like, look, if we get 2 good harvests in a row and we open up this big gas field, in a sense, the current account constraint goes away and inflation will come down, right? But for the people who have been stuck living in this basically for a decade, they were like, no, we just want a different model. We're not doing this anymore. And if we have to walk through hell to get it, we're going to do it.
Right. Wow. I mean, it's just just think of the frame of mind again of like getting pinched even more.
Right.
To like for the
I mean, it's a bit like the United States. You got, lefty economists that I know and I like, talking all the time about why people don't understand the economy because, they're looking around, they're like unemployment's at an all-time low and growth is high and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, but, real wages, right, adjusted for inflation, there's thing it's the median real wage has finally got back to where it was in 2019. Now, you might not say that's not terrible, right? We've been through a tough time. There's been inflation, all things considered. But it's not. Nobody's going to be running around the block going, this is the best ever. Right. So, people understand their local economic conditions. And if you keep turning around talking about, as Biden does, good union jobs, and less than 1 in 10 people are in unions, right? So it's no resonance, right? And the economy is doing great. I mean, this has just got the Clinton campaign, 2016 written all over it, right? We're celebrating how great everything is. And people are like, really? Have you been to my town?
Right. I think about this anew all the time because, right, we avoid a recession, like everything's so great. How come people don't understand this? But no one ever talks about like wage stagnation, like as part of maybe stuff costs more because you're getting paid the same.
And now here, there is a paradox in this because actually the latest figures have shown that for the first time in 30 years, the bottom sort of 25% have made serious wage gains. like serious wage gains, right?
Yeah.
But this actually goes back almost to 2017 when this started. Remember the whole thing that Trump had about that little Twitter spat with the Fed about running the economy hot, right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They did run the economy hot and wages started to rise at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then they got walloped in the pandemic, but then they've come back strongly now. Actually, what's happened is growth at the top has fallen and growth at the bottom's up. So there is a positive story, right?
Yeah.
It just, there is a partisan effect. I'm not saying that there isn't, right? If you just survey Republicans, things are like, you'd think that we're, eating our own children and, living in hell at this point in time. But, the picture is positive, but nonetheless, you don't get any credit for it. Well, you don't get any credit for it because, it's been a long time coming.
I noticed that the Federal Reserve made an announcement last week that they were not going to increase rates.
And the market lost its collective kittens and went on a tear because say that to me, right? Say you're the Fed. Say to me what you just said.
Okay. Mr. Market, we're going to leave interest rates where they are.
There's going to be 6 cuts. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be the best time ever. It's like talking to a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
It's like what you say to them and what they hear are two different things. So, the markets have become very energized by this. It's been on a bit of a tear. It's called the Santa Rally. Yeah, right. Literally.
Santa
Santa Rally,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
And, they're just banking on sort of like, it's all going to go back to normal. One interesting little wrinkle on this, and I think this is not interesting in and of itself, but it's interesting of the type of thing that we're going to have to think about going forward, is the whole situation in the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So if you're basically taking your oil tankers in another 7 days because you have to go all the way around South Africa and come up, right? You can do this, right? It's a question of supply constraints, etc. Remember the supply constraints of the pandemic,
yes, right?
This might have an inflationary effect, maybe a mild one, right? So if it does, though, and you see those numbers going up, then the Fed are definitely not going to cut. Mm-hmm. Now, this is more important than we think because as geopolitics becomes more complex, right?
Yeah.
Things like this are going to happen more.
Yeah.
And as climate becomes more fragile, things like this are going to happen more.
Yeah.
So the kind of like mean reversion that the markets want to see is sort of like back to like 2% interest rates and 3% growth, and then we'll just carry on and everybody makes a ton of money. That's going to become more complex going forward. I just don't think you're ever going to shake it out to the, like, let's go back to the way it was and when was it perfect? The Great Moderation in 2005.
Right.
It's never going to happen again.
Right. And your point about the political risk too that this isn't some like rare occurrence that's going to happen or that's happening right now.
And so, in China, the whole China thing is very interesting in this one as well because, they're in a slump. That was never meant to happen, right?
Yes.
It was just going to open up and go gangbusters.
Yep.
And it turns out that when you have a massively oppressive Communist Party apparatus sucking the soul out of entrepreneurship and fun, does have a dampening effect.
No, there's all these news stories of talking to the man on the street sort of interviews, and the Chinese dream is dead, and they're like, why did I bother? I went to university and I can't.
Yeah, exactly. No. So it's funny because on the hysterical side of this, you get people like screaming that China is now dead and defunct and all that. On like a year of data, we'll see, right? But it's interesting that they keep talking about China's youth unemployment rates now close to 20%, and this is outrageous. That's the European norm.
Is it?
Yeah. Let's put it in perspective.
This is interesting though because I'm curious whether this shakes Xi Jinping's the support within the party, or if it's something they just kind of shrug off.
So the weird thing about parties, though, sort of one-party regimes, is that they understand. The most extreme example of this is North Korea. Is everyone associated with the regime understands that you rise and fall with the regime? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So if he goes down, there's a very good chance you're going down too. Yeah. So no matter how bad it gets, you'd kind of like double your bet with the leader. Right. Because I'm tied to you. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So we were talking about this beforehand, and I was interested to hear your point of view on what just happened with Google and the verdict or the decision with Epic Games that they had Google pushes all the payments for if you buy stuff on Fortnite through their pay system, and it was a jury trial. Jury said no, you can't do this, and so everyone's those who know the tech side of things are excited. This is a signal, end of monopolistic behavior, like $630 million, like blah blah, on and on and on, and you kind of. Yeah, I'm like blah. Yeah. I just went blah. Yeah. So the reason I'd go blah is go look at Google's market cap and divide 630 million into it. Isn't even a rounding error, right? Yeah, so that's there's that, right? Second thing is, and I think we've spoken about this before on a previous episode, if you go back to the idea of trust busting, right?
Yeah.
So you had Standard Oil and you controlled all the oil,
Yeah.
right? You had Standard Railroads and controlled it. So you'd break them up into smaller things and make them compete with each other, right? And you can kind of do that. You can imagine even sort of with telecoms in the 1980s, you invented the baby bells and you could get a better long distance deal from this one, right? And then what happens is, when you just let markets do their thing, everyone just merges and buys up the opposition.
Yeah.
And then you end up with 3 or 4 firms. And this is why airlines are terrible. And it costs a fortune to fly anywhere. And this is why our mobile phones cost 3 times as much as they do in Europe because they regulate them, et cetera, right? But to go back to the Googles, et cetera, the reason they're so powerful is they're natural monopolies of a different type. They're in a sense like, imagine a shopping center. And the only place you can shop is in the shopping center.
Yeah.
So you have to go to the shopping center.
Yeah.
You could build another shopping center, but nobody's going to build another shop in that shopping center. There's just one.
Yep.
You can't really, what do you break it into Amazon Northeast?
Yeah.
Versus Amazon Southwest, and then we'll scour the internet for coupons to see which one's cheaper.
Yep. Yeah.
It just doesn't work with these things. So you end up in a situation, it's a bit like how we regulate banks. And the answer to that is badly. And the reason we do this is because we don't fundamentally know how to change the business model to make it safe. So what we do is we regulate accidents when they happen. So what you're looking at is the regulation of an accident after it happens. And then we say, you can't do that anymore. And they go, okay. And then they go off and do something else. And they'll keep doing something else until someone says, you can't do that. And they go, all right, well, I won't do that. And you do this kind of ad hoc, casualty triage regulation. And that's basically what you get. So unless you have a real commitment to basically turning these things into public utilities, literally you buy them out and you socialize them, and I see that ever happening. Yeah, this is just a different form of capitalism.
I get, well, and your point about the shopping center too, I use the credit card, right? Because they only take the one credit card and they all the stuff. And even if I had another credit card, like, why does it matter? Because they don't take that there.
No.
And the other shopping center doesn't have any stuff.
Right.
So,
no, I mean, if you think about credit cards, a great example of this, right? I don't know if you track credit card rates, right? But I mean, they were always extortionate. Remember in the days when we had 0 interest rates? Did you ever see a 0 interest rate credit card? No, you get a 0 balance transfer, after which it becomes prime plus 12, right? So you were paying about 17%. I was on, I think it was an airline website, and they had the advert up for their card. I was like, I wonder what they're paying these days. They wanted 35%.
Holy cow.
And people are paying this.
Yeah.
Right? So again, factor this back into sort of like the economy is doing well, right? I'm paying 35% on my credit card. I flew to Oregon and it cost me $1,000.
Yeah.
There was no food and I was in the middle seat.
This is a true
Tell
story.
me everything's great. Just, I dare you to tell me everything's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's great. Okay, well, where do we go from here then?
We cannot dodge the Israel issue. It's very interesting to me that no matter how bad relations between the United States and Israel gets, the United States, because it is always in the position of having Israel's back no matter what they want to do, the United States is meant to be a superpower, and it basically becomes a case of, no, you're not.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You will basically back us, and this is it. Right?
Yes.
And it's funny when you read the press on this, because you get this stuff about Biden's feeling uncomfortable with this. Oh, I'll bet he is.
Yeah.
Because there are 200,000 Muslim Democratic voters in Michigan.
Yep.
And at the moment, they're not going to go anywhere near you for this election that's coming up. Yep. So they're really beginning to worry about the price that they're going to pay for the support. Second thing is, and this is something that we used to talk about with Ukraine, which we've forgotten about, which is, what is the end game?
Yeah.
Right? How does this end?
Yeah.
And to me, I just don't see how basically turning all of Gaza into rubble, making 2 million people homeless, and killing 10x, if not 20x, by the time you're done, of the people who harmed you, is going to do anything other than create yet another organization that won't be called Hamas, that will have just as many members. And you're further away from peace. So then the end game becomes, is there an end game that is anything other than just perpetual violence?
I know. And your point of, like, we were talking about immigration earlier, already you start to hear Egypt fussing about the...
I mean, if the end game is basically to push everyone into the Sinai and turn it into Egypt's problem, right? The Egyptians really just are not going to allow that one to happen.
Yeah.
And if it is essentially we're just going to keep bombing them until we run out of bombs, then there's no solution in that there either. It's just the answer becomes violence and the problem becomes violence.
Well, and never. And I mean, there's a period last week, a couple weeks ago, where there's 3 to 4 days where there was there was a halt. And you kind of think, well, can't you just continue to do that? Like, why,
But if you have the war aim of destroying Hamas and destroying its leadership, right?
Yeah.
Then you do a halt to get some of your hostages back, and then you just continue on with this.
But then don't the goalpost moves? Okay, so you destroy Hamas, you destroy the leadership, and then it's something else.
What if Hamas isn't a thing? What if Hamas is an idea?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't destroy ideas.
Yeah.
And that becomes the thing that you can't fight. That's the thing that jeopardizes Israeli security more than anything else.
Yeah. And your point about Michigan is right. I mean, one of the recent Michigan polls shows that Trump is up in a state that Biden won pretty handedly.
Yep.
So, I mean, he's feeling very uncomfortable and very hot.
So the Americans are going to want, the American administration is going to want a swift resolution.
Yeah.
Whether the Israelis want a swift resolution is an entirely different thing.
No, your point about an idea is really, Yeah.
So we dealt with it. Now on to lighter things.
Oh, yeah. That's a hard U-turn. There's a hard left turn there. Any end of the year sort of stuff that you favorite, of 2023?
No, there was none. It was all just bleak and miserable.
Yeah.
Was there actually good stuff? I'm trying to think. I'm enjoying the recovery of Everton under Sean Dyche in the Premier League. That's a bit of a niche topic.
Okay.
What else am I enjoying or have enjoyed from now? It was a nice summer.
Yeah.
In general.
Look at all these positives.
Have you got anything? Give me some.
Well,
pitch me
yeah.
some.
So I was thinking, favorite movie, that sort of stuff.
Nobody goes to movies, and all movies that are released now are crap. You ever noticed this?
Yeah, well, there was the big Barbie was the big movie.
Oh, there was Barbenheimer, right? Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a great movie. There's a small little movie called Past Lives that I watched on an airplane from a middle seat, actually. But I had some water, so that seemed,
You know, when you're an American, they say, we've got endless movies on our app, and all you need to do is plug into our Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I have never got that Wi-Fi to work.
Yeah.
Like, ever.
Yeah. But overall, I mean, I think, because of the writers' strike and stuff, I think that will bear the brunt of that in 24. But I mean, it was all streaming stuff.
I finally got around to watching the latest Mission Impossible film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, this is part one, and I had to watch it in 2 chunks because it's about 3.5 hours long, right?
Yeah.
And there's clearly a sort of like act one where, like, spoiler alert, one of the main protagonists dies. Yeah. And then after that, there's and now we'll go do the rest of the amazing caper thing, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone says it's like, you're looking at Tom Cruise and you're just like, how old are you again?
Right. Yeah.
It's insane.
I mean, and he does his own stunts.
I know.
The whole thing, and
he's going to continue to do it. And I was just thinking, at some point he's got to be a 70-year-old action hero.
And just like physically will have to have aged.
You'd think, but I mean, I don't know. There's got to be several mirrors somewhere in an attic aging.
It's the Scientology.
It must be. Maybe it is. Maybe that is a secret.
Yeah.
Ooh,
yeah. I mean, and for 2024, I'm just trying to get through the year. I'm hoping we can just maybe skip over and skip to 2026 or something, just because of the presidential campaign, and it's going to be,
It's going to be brutal, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's face the facts. It's going to be brutal. So anyway, on that nice cynical note, let's end the year.
Always great to see you. Happy New Year.
Yes.
Happy winter break.
Happy Christmas.
And I'll see you next year.
Exactly. Bye.
Thanks for listening.